Adulting is hard. Your vibe doesn't have to be. Welcome to Adulting Candle Company, where self-care smells amazing. From stress-melting wax melts to crystals that calm the chaos, we've got the tools to help you glow up your grown-up life. Shop now at www.adultingcandleco.com, because if you're going to pay bills and fold laundry, you deserve to do it in the scent of lavender, vanilla, and victory. I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Hooked on the podcast? Now you can hold the stories in your hands. World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1 is now out on Amazon. 10 unforgettable tales of resilience, loss, and hope from the people forever changed by war. Available in paperback and on Kindle. Today's episode, From the Far Side of the Empire. France calls upon her loyal sons from across the seas. Let the Empire stand united. The poster stared him in the face, printed in bold, proud letters in his native tongue. Fan Ming read the words carefully, though he already knew them by heart. He had never thought of himself as anything but a subject of France. Annam, Indochina, it was all a part of the empire. Names changed, flags didn't. He was fluent in French. The Catholic mission had seen to that. Taught him the language of the empire, taught him to pray in it, read in it, dream in it. So why wasn't this poster also written in French? That, more than the message itself, unsettled him. Who was it meant for if not men like him? "Come on, keep it moving," came the booming voice of the captain leading the procession. Fan snapped back to reality. He was in a long, shuffling line of volunteers and conscripted boys headed to war. Fan Ming read the words carefully, though he already knew them by heart. The ship reeked of salt and sickness. Men had filled its hold, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, for nearly 6 weeks, crossing waters wider than anything Fan had ever imagined. Now, as he stepped onto the dock at Marseille, the wind cut through his borrowed coat like it wasn't there at all. The sky was a dull, merciless gray. Not like the grays of home during the rainy season when warm rain fell on clay roofs and frogs sang in the paddies. This gray had weight to it. It made his bones ache. Around him, hundreds of men stood in clumps. Some were from the north, Tonkinese, quiet and reserved. Others spoke with the rhythm of Cochin China. A few Algerians watched them with tired eyes. No one smiled. No one spoke unless spoken to. Fan stood with the others awaiting his turn to be addressed by a clerk at a desk so far removed from the crowd he could barely be seen. "Nam?" the French clerk asked, not looking up after he finally made his way to the front. "Fan Ming." The man scribbled on a clipboard. "Fan Men, du quattro du sept." Fan almost corrected him, but thought better of it. The man had already moved on. They waited for hours. Cold seeped into Fan's feet and fingers. When food came, it was a tin of beans and a crust of bread harder than anything he'd eaten before. He didn't know the word for inedible, but he knew the feeling of chewing without purpose. When the train came, it was not the sleek kind he had imagined from books. It was a cattle car, wooden, loud, and cold. They loaded in silently. No one gave instructions. Fan pressed his back against the wall and watched the hills pass through a small slit between the wood slats of the rail car. He had not seen Paris. He hadn't even seen a building taller than the bell tower in his old village. France, it seemed, had not been waiting for him. They arrived under cover of night. No town lights, just lamps on posts and officers with lanterns that flared like fireflies. Orders were barked in quick, clipped French Fawn could barely follow. They were herded down a muddy path and told to sleep in a barn. He lay on straw that smelled of mold and horses. His coat barely covered his knees. The men next to him coughed in his sleep. He thought of his mother, of the river behind their hut, of the letter she had given him, folded and wrapped in cloth. He hadn't opened it yet, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid it might smell like home. In the morning, he was put on a work detail. "Shovel," said a soldier, handing out equipment. He slapped a rusty spade into Fawn's hand. "Dig here. Reinforce the trench wall." The man next to him spoke softly in his native tongue. "You're Fan Men?" he asked. His accent was rougher, northern maybe. "I'm Bao." "Fan Ming," he replied. "Nice to meet you, Fan Ming. Shall we dig?" Fan looked around. There were at least 100 men already at work, maybe more, shoulders hunched, shovels moving rhythmically through the frozen mud. "We shall," he said. They dug for hours, taking breaks when allowed. The mud was stiff with frost. Fawn's hands cracked and bled inside his gloves. Around them, the forest was quiet, as if waiting for something worse. Bao didn't speak again until the midday break. "It's hard work," he said, catching his breath. "But just think, they fight, we save lives." Fawn looked around at the trench that was taking shape and realized Bao was right. They would save many lives with what they were building. "That's a great way of looking at it, Bao." "For France." Bao grinned. "For Indochina." That night, a fire crackled in the center of the work camp. It didn't give off much warmth, but the men sat close anyway, leaning in as if the flame alone could make them forget where they were. Fawn sat beside Bao and listened. A few men told stories, voices low and tired. One spoke of his wife in Tonkin who was waiting with their firstborn. Another remembered climbing coconut trees as a boy and throwing fruit at French schoolchildren. That one earned a few laughs. Bao didn't speak. Neither did Fawn. Not at first. He thought of home, their small hut in Saigon, of the narrow alley where he'd grown up, where the air always smelled like fried garlic and diesel. His mother ran a small stall selling rice cakes. His father fixed sewing machines. His little sister Mai had just started writing her name without help. She was 7. He remembered how she waved with both hands when he boarded the train. He hadn't written yet. He wanted to wait until he had something worth telling them. He told himself he would send money soon, enough for my school fees, maybe even for a new sign for his mother's stall. That thought warmed him more than the fire ever could as he fell into a deep slumber. Morning came without color. Just a pale light that slid over the frozen fields and settled on the faces of men too tired to greet it. Fawn's back ached before he even stood up. He rolled his shoulders, pulled on his damp coat, and followed Bao to the tool line. No one spoke much. The cold pressed their voices flat. The trench they had worked on the day before had frozen overnight, solid like a stone. Bao chipped at the wall with a pickaxe while Fawn used the flat edge of his spade to pry out slabs of dirt and ice. Their breath hung in front of them like smoke. There were more French soldiers around today. Officers, too. Pacing, not shouting, but brisk. Focused. One barked at a work crew to move faster. Another stood near a map studying it like he was preparing for a test. Bao noticed it first. "They're nervous," he said. Fawn didn't respond. He just kept digging. A few minutes later, a soldier staggered past with a bloodied arm, escorted by 2 others. He wasn't from their unit. His uniform was torn, face pale. The others looked straight ahead, saying nothing. "Maybe it's a training injury," Bao offered. but his voice was less certain now. That afternoon, everything felt different. The front was getting closer, not because they'd moved, but because the fighting had. The trench they'd been digging now sat at the edge of something far more dangerous. The digging continued, but the mood had changed. The earth, which had once given way to their tools with quiet resistance, now seemed to resist entirely, roots snapping like bones, rocks dulling the blades of their shovels. At some point near dusk, Fawn straightened his back to rest and heard it. A low rumble, then a distant thud, like thunder, but heavier, slower. He looked up. The others had paused too. Bao's eyes searched the horizon, and Fawn turned his gaze in the same direction. With each dull thud, with each distant rumble, there came a flash, a narrow column of fire and earth erupting from the landscape. The burst stood in sharp contrast against the darkening sky. He looked at Bao. They're getting closer. Bao hung his head. That's why they want us to dig faster. The sound of artillery grew steadier as the hours passed. Not close, but not far enough anymore. Fawn could feel it in the earth, just barely, like the ground flinching before each distant strike. He and Bao had been working the same stretch of trench for most of the day. Their gloves were soaked, fingers stinging inside them. The wall still needed bracing, and Bao was just about to wedge a plank into place when a voice shouted behind them, not at them, but past them. Dozens of boots thundered forward. French soldiers began pouring into the trench, rifles slung, uniforms coated in dust. They didn't slow, didn't look at the laborers. One brushed past Bao hard enough to knock the board from his hands. Another nearly stepped on Fawn's shovel. The soldiers moved with mechanical precision, some taking positions, others hammering wooden support beams into the walls. Sandbags were passed hand to hand. A roll of barbed wire was dropped in the mud like luggage. The trench wasn't finished, but it didn't matter. There were no orders to leave, no step aside, just the shift of bodies, the momentum of urgency. Fawn and Bao backed away on instinct. The place that had been theirs, dug by their hands, now belonged to someone else. Bao stood against the trench wall, breathing heavily. He looked dazed. "They're not waiting," Fawn said quietly. "They can't," Bao replied. He picked up the board he'd been holding and leaned it silently against the wall. Neither man returned to work. They climbed out of the trench with the others, boots slick with clay and hands numb beneath torn gloves. No one gave thanks, no one gave orders, until a French officer pointed north and barked something too fast for Fawn to catch. Another man translated roughly, "March, 1 mile, make camp." They marched. No wagons, no warmth, just the sound of tired feet on frozen earth and the dull thud of shovels slung over shoulders. It was pitch dark when they reached a patch of frost-bitten trees and a shallow ditch that passed for shelter. No tents, no firewood, just the order to make camp and the cold truth that it was up to them what that meant. Fawn dropped his pack and looked around. A few men began clearing brush and searching for wood dry enough to catch. Others peeled off their coats and spread them over the stiff ground as makeshift bedding. No tents, no firewood, no direction. Bao didn't say much, just sat, hunched, and pulled a crust of bread from his coat. Fawn sat beside him. They shared what they had without speaking. The stars, which had filled the sky so brilliantly the nights before, were now subdued, dimmed by the constant flicker of artillery somewhere far ahead of them. Fawn watched his breath drift into the black air and curled his knees towards his chest. There was nothing left to do now but wait for another order, another trench, another day. He glanced at Bao, the man who once grinned and said, "We save lives," now stared into the dark like it might answer back. He did not know when he had fallen asleep. The fire had burned itself into small orange glowing embers. It no longer provided comfort or warmth. It was the noise that had woken him, and as he looked around, he noticed that it had woken others as well. Even from their vantage point, a mile away from the trench they had dug, they could tell that the distant thuds and rumbles, which had once pulsed with their own heartbeat, had now become a cacophony of chaos. Fawn was the first to stand, to stare at what he thought was a strangely beautiful sight. He had never known that death and destruction could look so poetic. The chaos carried through the night and into the dawn. Fawn and the other laborers could only watch as French soldiers began to fall back, some limping, some dragging equipment, until they gathered in loose clusters near the tree line where the laborers had made camp. Moments later, fresh troops surged forward from the rear, brushing past the exhausted men towards the very trenches they had just dug out. The confusion didn't end with the sunrise. For days, the laborers remained in the makeshift camp, still without orders, still without weapons. Supplies came sporadically. Food was scarce. Some men dug shallow fire pits. Others simply sat in silence, waiting for someone to tell them what came next. No one ever did. Fawn lost track of the days, but he knew it had been nearly a week. Every night they would watch the fires in the sky and along the horizon, and every morning they would watch soldiers rush past towards the front. Every evening more would return, fewer, quieter, often bandaged. None of them acknowledged the laborers. He and Bao listened when they could. Two French soldiers stood nearby one afternoon, speaking quickly between bites of a baguette that Fawn just wished he could have a small bite of. They didn't lower their voices. Why would they? Fawn was close enough to hear, but not close enough to matter. "The Germans pulled back last night, completely out of the sector." "Doesn't matter. The trench is wrecked. Artillery took most of it. Needs clearing before it's usable again." The soldiers walked on. They hadn't looked at Fawn once. Fawn turned to Bao. "Did you hear that?" Bao nodded. "They'll send us in soon, to dig it out again." Fawn looked down at his hands, still stained with soil. "That's all they need us for," he said. That night was vibrant, but without the familiar thuds and whistles of artillery and gunfire. The stars had returned to their rightful place high above, steady and bright. Fires burned across the camp, and the French soldiers celebrated, loud and gleeful, voices raised in laughter, stories shouted over clinking plates. They had driven the Germans back. For now. Fawn sat with his back against a tree, quietly eating the largest meal he had seen since arriving in France. He chewed slowly, savoring it. Thick stew, warm bread, something that tasted like lamb. And as he ate, he realized something else. The French army had reserves. Cattle, livestock, enough to feed them like this all the time. They could feed everyone like this if they wanted to. Again, if they wanted to. The next morning came gray and slow. Gone were the songs and laughter. The fires had burned to ash. The soldiers who had cheered the night before now moved with stiff purpose, packing gear, tightening belts, checking rifles. The laborers stood off to the side. No one had told them where to go or what to do. That part hadn't changed. Then came the officer. He didn't address the group, just pointed at a few men, barking names in rough French. Fawn heard his own mispronounced name somewhere in the middle. Bao was called too. They stepped forward without a word. "You, Trench, the officer said, gesturing vaguely to the southeast. Debris, clear it, make it usable. No further explanation, no escort, no protection, just the order, and then he was gone. Fawn looked at Bao. Bao gave the smallest of shrugs. The two of them joined a handful of others and began the slow walk towards the trench they had helped carve into the frozen earth nearly 2 weeks before. As they got closer, they saw it, or what was left of it. The trench had collapsed in places, caved in entirely in others. Timber split, sandbags torn, boards jutting out like broken ribs. Shell craters pocked the area, some still smoking faintly in the cold air. And blood, so much blood, dried in streaks along the shattered walls and in pools where some poor soul had surely lain. Fawn paused at the edge looking at the effects of the chaos they had all watched from a distance. They had dug this. They had shaped it with their hands, and now they were here to dig it out again, not to reclaim it, not to hold it, just to clear the path for others. He picked up his shovel and stepped down into the mud. They worked in pairs, one man clearing debris, the other reinforcing the walls. The others moved silently, shovels scraping and boots sinking deep into the mud. No one spoke. No one had to. Fawn was assigned to the southern end of the trench where the wall had collapsed in on itself. It wasn't the worst damage, but it was deep. A few rocks and broken timbers jutted out at odd angles, leaving strange pockets in the debris, like air had been trapped in the fall. He planted his feet and drove the spade into the wet earth. The first few shovelfuls were just soil and timber. The fourth struck something different. Not stone, not wood. Softer. Heavy. A sick, wet squelch echoed up through the mud. Fawn froze. He lifted the spade. There was something dark on the blade. Too dark for dirt. He tossed the shovel aside and dropped to his knees, hands already digging. His fingers clawed through the wet soil, faster, more frantic, until they brushed cloth, then skin. He scraped the mud away with his bare hands, uncovering a face. Young, pale, eyes half-lidded, lips parted like he was trying to speak. The boy was still breathing. Gagging, really. A thin stream of red bubbled at the edge of his mouth. Fawn looked him over. The uniform was French. The boy couldn't have been older than 18, maybe 17. Then Fawn saw it. The wound, just below the jawline. Fresh. Deep. Still bleeding. He had done it. The spade. His spade. It had struck the boy in the throat. The breath came slower now, each one a struggle. The boy blinked once, slowly. Fawn reached for him, but didn't know where to touch. Didn't know how to stop it. Didn't know if it could be stopped. The boy's gaze met his just for a moment, and then the death rattle. Fawn had never heard that sound before. It sent a cold shiver through his spine, deeper than any wind ever had. He picked up his shovel and began to dig the boy out. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. If this episode stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet or left you in stillness, share it, follow the show, leave a rating, help keep these stories alive. Our first collection now lives on Kindle. Search World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1 in your Kindle app, and carry these echoes with you. For glimpses behind the curtain and stories between the stories, join me on Instagram at WWIPod_HennyB. And if you'd like to see your name in the credits, become a producer. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I stories and help power the next tale into existence. Thank you for walking back in time with me.